An article from The Hill that I thought was interesting is called U.S. Children Are Struggling with Reading, and So Are Adults. Learning to read can become exceptionally more difficult for older students and adults who have fallen behind, creating grave concerns as the number of individuals struggling with literacy into high school and adulthood is increasing. Data released in recent months shows K to 12 students are seeing more older students who cannot read at their grade level, coupled with an international study showing an increase in U.S. adults who cannot read past simple sentences. We are really taking a family literacy approach to understand this issue and to recognize this is a multi generational challenge. If the parents and caregivers struggle with literacy, the children are more likely to also struggle with literacy, said Sarah Kikasio, the director of Adult Literacy and Learning Impact Network, which was convened by the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. Socioeconomic status and parents' literacy levels are bigger indicators for how well a child is going to do, even more so than quality instruction, although quality instruction is super important, Kikasio added. That's why it's so important to address this issue of literacy at multiple generations. The National Center for Education Statistics, NCES, part of the Department of Education, released data earlier this month showing 28% of adults in the U.S. ranked at the lowest levels of literacy compared to 19% in 2017. NCES Commissioner Peggy Carr said in the news conference that increase was substantial. Studies have shown that low literacy rates exacerbate everything from poverty in healthcare to low civic engagement, and while there are programs to help adult learners, concerns about time and money can prove problematic. We connected with individuals who could enroll in adult education services but have not. And what we found is that 80% of the adults surveyed didn't know about available programs in their area, but 84% said they would like to continue learning and enroll in the program. So what that tells us is it's less about time and more about awareness. We really think that lack of awareness about free programs and access to resources and services is the number one barrier, as well as perceived cost. KKCO added. Federally funded adult education programs are only serving really fewer than 10% of all of those who need literacy services, she added. Adult literacy problems are tricky to resolve and lack a one size fits all solution. When adults join reading programs, they can be at literacy levels ranging from those of third graders to high school seniors. I think one of the interesting things about adult learning is that you can't really design a standard curriculum, Kikasio said. Some people are more looking for work based learning, or if they're an English learner, they're trying to learn specific language and vocabulary that connects to their workplace, she added. And the problem isn't limited to adults. Earlier this year, a study was released by the Educational Testing Service and the Advanced Education Research and Development Fund showing more than 20% of students in 5th through 7th grade stumble over words they can't recognize or sound out. Experts aim to have children reading proficiently at their own level by 3rd grade. Over the summer, education from NWEA published data showing 8th graders are a full year behind in reading and math. So, 4th grade is when you start to see significant gaps in reading, and many times these comprehension gaps are actually due to more foundational skills. So, something that students didn't get either in phonics instruction, or they're lacking vocabulary or background knowledge to be able to comprehend the text, or they just haven't been taught comprehension strategies, said Aaron Bailey, Vice President of Literacy and Content at Reading is Fundamental. Excuse me. Students struggling with reading have become a top concern, with multiple states switching to the science of reading for young students in an attempt to help them meet standards before leaving 3rd grade. Part of the difficulty once a student falls behind is teachers in higher grades haven't been trained to help students with the building blocks of reading. For most students, in most places around grade 6, definitely by grade 8, students no longer have a reading teacher unless they're in intervention or there's some data that indicates they needed some additional services. But your majority of kids, they're not in a reading class anymore, said Maya Daughtry, NWEA Vice President for Content Advocacy. Your average English teacher is no more prepared to teach reading than your average physics teacher. Your English teacher does not have to go to school to learn how to teach reading. They go to school to learn how to teach the humanities in English, Daughtry said. This leads to a common reading problem between older students and adults, which is lacking context or background knowledge to understand the text in front of them. We have adolescents, young adults, and adults who are still growing in their reading journey, either from being non readers to rudimentary readers to readers, even readers like me, who are good readers but really still need help with technical text and science text. the brain is such a phenomenal organ. You can really learn how to read for most people through the course of your life, Daughtry said. This is interesting. I guess I shouldn't say I'm that surprised. Um, People have been dissuaded from reading, if you really think about it. Like a lot of times, when, just give us some examples. Um, this is a very hard story for me to empathize with. Like I'm sympathetic towards people who don't know that there are free programs because a lot of this stuff does not get promoted. A lot of times there are adults that struggle with things that people around them either don't notice or they don't care to notice or say anything to them about, and it can, have any more devastating consequences if they have kids who they in turn cannot help with their homework because they can't read the stuff themselves. Um, those are things I can be sympathetic towards, but it's just, I guess I look at it this way. In an era of social media, in an era of just, I mean, I just can't see where if a person wants to learn how to read or read more proficiently, they don't have the ability to do so. Um, and that's what's kind of creating this gap between me and the article, because while I am sympathetic to people that do struggle with these things, it's just not something I've ever really had to deal with. Like when I was a kid, I used to read comic books, and sometimes they have words in there that I might not immediately pick up on or be familiar with. And then, thanks to the wonders of the internet, you can type in the word and get the definition of it. Um, and of course, as an adult, I read books all the time. I have some stacks behind me. I don't want to get up and show them, but you get the idea. It's one of those things where it's just, I guess I'm so often having to read, whether it's to make a video, for fun, for the sake of reading the news. I read the news more than I watch it. That it's almost inconceivable to me that I would even need to, or ever think to look for courses on literacy. And it's scary to know that there are adults, there are people who clock into a 9 to 5 who read at the level of a third grader. And the sad part is that they might not even be aware, because so often with a lot of these jobs, you have your boss come up to you and say, hey, do this, go here, do that, and you know how to do that one specific thing or those couple of things, but there's not really any reading required, so they can operate as if they are. And it's not to say this is like an insult, but they can operate without the perceived needing of this ability, um, with possibly for years until they come across something like having to help their child, or maybe they get a new job that requires them to read, where suddenly that lack of ability just catches up to them and just crashes all at once. And when she said one of them was talking about there's no standard curriculum for adults, that's true. If they're all over the place like that, where you have some who can read at the third grade level, some who can read at the high school level, I absolutely believe that would make it even more difficult to teach them than children, because with children there's always it does the gap is nowhere as pronounced because they just haven't lived as long, and they're still in school, so there's the perception that there's still time to get them to catch up, or whatever level that they're at. I will say that one part of this article that really did resonate with me is where they talk about how when these grades get higher, about like fourth, fifth grade, that's where students start to have not deficiencies, but to be less inclined to be at the level they're expected to be for, reading and math. And man, I could talk about how much trouble I had with math when I was in school for a whole video. I can make a whole 2 hour, whole movie length video about the struggles I had with math. So that's something I'm not going to critique anyone over. All I'll say is that with reading, it's really scary to think that there are people who can't read that well, or they even said a couple of sentences, because if you're trying to learn how to do something, unless there's a person who's verbally telling you it, a lot of times your ability to learn about that thing is conveyed in writing, in text. And if you don't have the ability to read that text on your own, you better hope that you have someone who can read it for you. I even had one relative that was trying to get it was something having to do with their license with the DMV, but they're like known to not be the most proficient reader. They're not dumb or anything you would say that was insulting. They know that they are aware that they're not as gifted in reading as they could be, and I was offering to read the stuff for them because I wanted them to be able to get their license. And it's just sad that we've normalized people not participating in some of the most basic aspects of growth and just understanding. I mean, there are so many things to read: books, news articles, hell, even song lyrics that I just couldn't imagine like reading nothing. So I think my solution would be that people need to enroll in these programs that are talking, especially if they're free, and there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to go to them, because usually the cost of things are what cause people to not participate with stuff that they need or get help that they need. But they're free. It at that point just doesn't. There's no excuse. Um, when it comes to stuff I think works, I'd recommend reading books. It doesn't have to be a long book. It doesn't have to be some one for adults theoretically, but just a book. You know, once a week, once a month. Um, this is just such a wild topic for me to cover. I feel like I'm in some parallel universe. Like I just couldn't imagine that it's increased that much, like almost 10 percentage points in what 6, 7 years. Man, the United States, it's amazing how the richest country in the world, right? All this money, and we have that many adults that have trouble with literacy, and it won't get talked about on CNN or MSNBC or Fox or any of these other garbage networks because they don't care about the people, and that lack of concern includes the things that directly affect them and their ability to get employment or to take care of themselves. And that's the saddest part of this story.